see if this thing works now. It usually does.
Well, we can get an expert over here in no time at all if it doesn't. Or
No, well, this is a very simplified machine. I'm very pleased with it.
Or bring a machine of our own over.
Sir?
I say, or bring a machine of our own over.
Yeah. Well, this is a peach. You get such excellent sound out of these things.
Our boys who are technically minded were delighted when we had an opportunity at the Roberts Line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they've done quite well with it.
Well, I'll bet they have, because, when I've had some engineers that, regular broadcast engineers.
This is not strictly professional stuff, but it's
No.
the next door, it's the next area to professional.
Well, I know a lot of professional engineers, broadcast engineers, would love to have some of these, put them in a rack,
Mm-hmm.
and get just as much, because the frequency response out of these, plus the actual sound, what you hear, what I hear, and what Joe Blow hears on the other end of that speaker. This is beautiful sound. Beautiful sound. And it's so realistic.
This is what I hear about it. Unfortunately, my education in this is not complete by any means.
There are a great many technical details that I can read the specs on it and know pretty much what I'm looking at. But my approach, my reaction is what comes out the other end, the sound, because it's the sound that you and the millions of other people hear. It's how they react to that sound.
Well, it's like the bread that comes out of the oven.
That's what you want. You want to know what's on your table.
Sure.
Well, in case the Dr. Baird didn't get into too much detail, what they're doing with the Living Legend Library is a recording with a minimum of 100 people, and it'll be a continuing thing. The people who have been in and around Oklahoma City for quite some time. And since we do enjoy the status of being, you might say, a first-generation city, it is comparatively young, they want to put in their library as much audible material as possible for research and for history and for workshop routines, so that when someone wants to know something about a particular item or wants to refer back to it, they can hear the voice of that individual and his reactions to the city and its progress, its growth, and his participation in it, so to speak. And you, Mr. Miller, this is Miller Jackson, isn't it?
Right.
Now, is it known as Distributing Company or what?
Miller Jackson Company Incorporated.
Mm-hmm. 113 East California.
East California.
And you're Mr. Ed Miller, right?
Right.
Any other initial?
H.
Edward H.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start back in sort of a chronological order and bring you up to date if we possibly can, and see if we can jog your memory a bit.
Are we on there now?
Now we're all set, yeah. To see when you came to Oklahoma City or to Oklahoma. What was your origin?
I was born in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
With my parents. I came to Oklahoma City in November 1904.
1904. Mm-hmm. Where in Missouri? From where, rather?
From Chillicothe, Missouri, North Central.
Uh-huh. I'm familiar with it, having spent some years in St. Louis. Yeah. And you came here to the city, to Oklahoma City?
Yes.
And let's see, how old were you at that time?
14.
14 years old.
I think my arithmetic's right.
Any other members of the family? Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I was the only member,
Only child. What did your father do?
At that time?
Yes, when he came to town.
He had been a traveler for St. Louis distributing firm, Crundon Martin Woodenware Company. And from that company and their catalog, and the experience he gained while with them, he conceived the idea of this business.
And did he establish this business when he
established this business?
Am I looking at his picture up
Right.
there over your head? And he was quite a stern-looking gentleman.
He could be very stern at times.
Where did he start the business, sir? Where in town here?
In Oklahoma City, in a building joining us on the north, on Grand Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
The building was one half of the building occupied by the Stanford or Sanford Grocery Company.
Mm-hmm.
And the other half was the Miller Toohey Tin and Woodenware Company. Mr. Toohey being also a Missourian, and a friend and customer of my father's when he traveled in North Missouri.
Well, what did he handle? What did he start his business doing?
The nearest definition in today's terms would be housewares.
Uh-huh.
Enameled wares, galvanized ware, tinware, woodenware, brooms, brushes, and some other products, but in a wholesale way.
Uh-huh.
Our business was done with retail dealers in the state of Oklahoma.
As opposed to just a retail business itself. You were a wholesale distributor.
We did no retail business.
No retail business.
Right.
Well, and you went coming here at 14. You finished high school here?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do then, sir?
I came down here to Miller Jackson Company.
And you came to work, huh?
I came to work.
Well, you really grew up in the business, didn't you?
True.
It's been quite I imagine, quite an experience for you as a young man, because at that age, 14, you naturally had some impressions when you came into the city, didn't you? Do you recall what you thought? Any of the ideas you had?
Yes, we came from a country that was timbered and more rolling than this,
Right.
so the fact that there was timber only along the waterways and the flatness of the country was quite impressive to me. I think I, like every other person coming into this Southwest for the first time, thought of Indians and looked for some evidence of them. It was many years before I saw an Indian.
Yeah.
We came into Oklahoma City on the Frisco, and the Frisco at that time followed the path it presently follows to about the location of the present Frisco passenger station, then curved around and came into the Frisco station of those days, approximately where the county courthouse now stands. And this seemed to me to be a long way around, but it was the way to get into Oklahoma City by Frisco.
Uh-huh. Oh, goodness. There weren't too many of them came in by train. As many of the people that we've talked to came in some other ways. Now, do you recall when you first lived when you were here?
We were met at the station by an uncle, my father's brother, who took us for 1 or 2 nights to his home on East 10th Street. The number I don't recall. My parents immediately began house hunting, and their first success was a very small suite of rooms at 120 or 124 West 7th Street, directly across from St. Paul's Cathedral. This property was owned by a Mrs. Phillips, a widow. And we were there through that winter. The winter of 1904 and 5 was a very severe winter. The ground, to my great delight, was covered with snow and ice, and we could skate anywhere in Oklahoma, streets, sidewalks, yards. And I did skate because I had brought my Missouri ice skates with me. And this snow and ice stayed on the ground for 4 or 5 weeks, perhaps a little longer than that. It was one of the most severe, one of the most lengthy winters I can remember.
I hadn't heard that before. Perhaps somebody has mentioned it, but it didn't impress me too much. But I hadn't heard that we had, back in those days, some real severe weather.
This city at that time was a territorial city, and we were not the capital, of course. I was not impressed with the saloons that were available in almost every block, because in North Missouri we had open saloons in those days. But there was a different element down here. There was in Oklahoma City gambling, and it was a more wide open city than the little city we had come from. That made quite an impression on me, although I wasn't a participant in either the gambling or the drinking in those days. The Daily Oklahoman was printed, I believe, at California and Broadway. Where the Oklahoman now stands was a church, rather severe lines, and the denomination has slipped me. It wasn't long, however, before the Oklahoma Publishing Company improved that corner and moved in. Main Street was the main street. Grand Avenue was second, poor second. Broadway was developed up to approximately 13th Street. Then the houses were scattered. One of the largest I can remember was the old Overholser home, which sat out in the center of a lot of space. Lordly grandeur, yes, but it was out in the country. The area that I recall was considered most elite was the area west of Broadway and 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th Streets. Rather small area in those days.
Yes, sir.
What direction would you like me to go?
Well, that's you're going along in pretty good shape. And after you got out of high school, and you came down here and went to work. And apparently you got quite a schooling from your father, didn't you? Probably did.
Couldn't be around him without getting schooling. He was a rather positive individual and a very determined individual. And it was very interesting to watch him go through the years and guide this company through the years. I often didn't agree with him, perhaps more often than not. Like many youngsters in teens or early 20s, I knew a good deal myself. Of course, it hadn't been tested those days.
True.
But yes, the guidance was good. If I had more of his characteristics, I would have progressed farther in the business way, I'm sure.
Well, apparently the guidance was very good, and he passed along a lot of good guidance, because business it's been a good, solid business, if we understand it.
Yes, I feel that it has.
And its growth pattern has been consistent with the area's growth, hasn't it?
I haven't been satisfied in that respect. I'm not speaking from modesty at all,
Mm-hmm.
just factually.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been an interesting business. It's been a business with plenty of competition coming from various types of distributors, wholesale hardware, wholesale furniture people,
Mm-hmm.
wholesale floor covering people, wholesale variety store people.
Mm-hmm.
So it has, we've come down through the years, we have felt more and more competition, that is, from more directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of this has been disconcerting, some of it has been very educational,
Mm-hmm.
and all of it has been challenging.
Mm-hmm. As all business can be, and particularly
True.
this business.
Yes. And particularly today.
Uh-huh.
There's not a day without its challenge.
It never lets up, does it?
True.
Well, that was known as the Miller Toohey Company then, huh? Back in the...
Mr. Doyle was a friend and customer of my father's,
Mm-hmm.
and his home was in Brookfield, Missouri,
Yeah.
a few miles east of Chillicothe.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Doyle was a younger man than my father. He was in more of a hurry. He lived quite a good deal faster pace than my father did, and after about 3 years, he decided this business would take too long. So there was a meeting of minds, and Mr. Doyle went, I believe, to Chicago. Another gentleman by the name of Samuel H. Jackson was also a friend and customer of my father's. He had a general mercantile business in Unionville, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere near Kirksville, Missouri.
Right.
He was interested in coming down here with and getting into the business with an investment. He was never active in the business except for brief periods.
Mm-hmm.
He lived in Missouri. He later lived in Kansas. At the time of his death, he lived in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that he was one of the most wonderful business partners that we could ever have had. A wonderful character, a world of experience in mercantile business, principally retail. He was a successful businessman, and this happy relationship lasted until he died in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
He was buried in Florence, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
In his will, it was directed that his heirs retain real estate and sell stocks. And this was carried out by his son, who was executor of the estate. This building and an additional 25 feet west of us were owned up to that time by S.H. Jackson individually.
Mm-hmm.
They were bought by the corporation from the Jackson estate. Mr. Jackson had two heirs, a son and a daughter. His son was interested in a manufacturing plant in Quincy, Illinois.
Mm.
He was not interested in coming here, being active in this business. His daughter was still in college when this happened. There is now no connection whatever, but because we are a corporation, we can continue to use the name, and we do so with a great deal of pride.
Mm-hmm.
That's my feeling because I remember Mr. Jackson so well.
Mm-hmm.
grand individual, very helpful to this company in many, many ways during its earlier days.
Well, I should judge, and it has been known as Miller Jackson for some years, so.
Yes, since before 1910.
So a good old established name. Certainly well worth keeping, isn't it?
As it is.
How long did your father participate in the business?
Well, he participated in the business until 1944. Just before an election in 1944, he had a stroke, and he couldn't leave the house on election day. He was one of the maddest men I've ever seen.
Oh.
Now, his participation in the business had tapered a good deal. Instead of being here at 7 o'clock in the morning, he would perhaps get down at 8:30, and he would perhaps leave at 2:30. That had been going on for some years. He loved to travel and did a good deal of it in North America, Caribbean, Europe, and these trips would take 60 days, 90 days. So we became accustomed by degrees to his not being with us continuously. But in 1944, it became evident to him and to the rest of us that he, so far as an active participation was concerned, this had to come to an end. He could no longer drive. He could walk quite well. He recovered in quite a satisfactory manner, but he was then past 80. And he took more and more of his, spent more and more of his time at home. He loved to read. His library has caused us and our offspring a lot of trouble. We wouldn't dispose of it for anything, and yet to have it and to keep it is quite a job.
What do you mean? Because of its size?
Because of its size.
Excuse me, go ahead.
My wife and I lived in a large home until 4.5 years ago. And we had rooms filled with books.
Yes.
We really took a great deal of pride in them. Some of them we'd never opened. But when it became desirable for us to give up this very large place and move into an apartment, we had to do something with the books. We divided them between our two daughters, who are both married, both live in Oklahoma City, and both of them have been involved in a move or two. These books are still a problem, but they love them for the same reason that we did.
Well, what type of books are they? Everything?
Encyclopedias, history, biography.
He must have collected them from all over the world, didn't he?
Well, I would say that for 30 years, or 40, he did collect books. I think he considered that the luxury denied him in his early life was literature. And he took full advantage of it when he could buy the books he wanted to read. It was a source of pleasure and escape. And I'm sure that he got a great deal of satisfaction from the books. When he could no longer read, his life became very hard. He could still play hitch and did.
Uh-huh.
He had been a bridge player, but bridge made him nervous. Cards made him nervous. He began to play dominoes a great deal. The dominoes didn't make him nervous. Not such a fast game.
Yeah, right.
Not a bidding game. Not the same kind of competition.
He sure sounds like an active man, or was an active man, mentally as well as physically.
Very.
Very stimulating to know, I suspect. Did you marry an Oklahoma City girl?
Yes. I married Mary Lessinger, who came to Oklahoma the same year we did, Iowa. We were married in 1917. We have 2 offspring. Mary Elizabeth was the first child. She is now Mrs. W.P. Brown, 1102 Huntington. The second one was Nancy, who is now Mrs. G.P. McCord. And they live in the 1100 block on 49th. I haven't learned the number.
You can find it, though. Huh?
Oh, yes, very easily. I remember their phone number.
Yeah. How about some grandchildren?
3. Mary Liz, 1, and that's Mr. and Mrs. Brown, and Nancy, Mrs. McCord, 2. One of them just celebrated her 18th birthday yesterday.
Any boys to sort of carry along in the business later?
Their son is named Ed Miller McCord. He is now 16 and possesses a driving license for, this is about the 2nd week, I think.
Well, that's a thrill for him.
And his greatest interest at this time is tennis. He's a student at Cassidy. He's on the Cassidy tennis team. He is good. And I hope he'll get better. I would rather see him make some other career for himself and keep this as an outlet for abundant energy. I hope that he'll study law. I believe that study of law has the greatest number of applications, whether it's to mercantile business or to whatever type of business. It's never amiss to have a legal background.
No, it isn't. It's a fine background for almost anything you can do.
Wonderful.
Well, that's wonderful.
And this boy may get into it. It's rather a coincidence that his father, who is a loan officer with Liberty National Bank, is now studying law to equip himself more fully for the job he's doing. This may have an effect on the boy's plans. I hope it does.
Perhaps so. Well, at least the tennis is a good outlet for him.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
This makes him sit tall in the saddle. He's a man among men now, even men of his own age.
They're pretty much men at 16 now, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Until very lately, I've been able to compete with him physically. I can't do it anymore.
Not anymore.
Well, this city has provided some wonderful recollections. The streetcars, the fantails. I don't know that you ever saw a fantail streetcar, these that I'm speaking of.
Perhaps not.
But the platform on the rear and all the loading and unloading was from the rear, was quite long. And a group of frivolous youngsters could get back there and start jumping up and down in cadence, and pretty soon the front truck of that car would go off and down. And this was done many times. the places to go were not so numerous in those days. There was a line to Capitol Hill. There was a line to Delmar Garden. That was a turnaround. There was a line to Maywood. This ran to about 7th and 8th and Lindsay. Another line was established out Classen to the Belle Isle Park, and Belle Isle gradually took over the attractiveness of Delmar Garden. Delmar Garden had a theater, had a big beer business. Wheeler Park was one of our leading city parks, and it was an interesting little place to get on grass and in the shade. Wheeler Park is still where it was originally. Belle Isle came in for a big swing, and then gradually declined in popularity. Lincoln Park was dreamed up and improved. And this and the other 4 parks on the Grand Boulevard began to take over from the already established parks. One of my regrets is that the Grand Boulevard, which was, as you know, a 26-mile highway around the city, was never fully capitalized. It still can be traced in places, but other things have taken the place of the delightful drive that it once was. It's hard to find out west of Oklahoma City now. It goes through the western part of the fairgrounds, goes down, can be traced to Reno. From there it's lost. And I'm not sure that Oklahoma City still owns the part of it south of Reno. The coming of statehood was a big event. The start of the Capitol building was a big event. I think I have been very privileged to have seen and recall events like that that are big historical events in Oklahoma. I recall very well the time that Jack Walton was mayor of Oklahoma City. Mr. Walton, to say the least, was a forceful character. He had his own opinions and ideas about how to run a city, and did. He surrounded himself with a bunch of gentlemen who would do his bidding. And some of the things they did were marvelous. Sometimes within the law. Well, of course, Mr. Walton went on to the State House and then was removed, if I'm not mistaken. One of the most interesting things to me, because at a very early age I am still interested in transportation. When we came to Oklahoma, it was a bicycle. And there were few of the roads in Oklahoma County that I didn't ride on a bicycle. I soon learned that sand and rock were not compatible with good bicycling. I graduated then through the generosity of my father to a motorcycle. And this gave me a little more speed and considerably more range. But it was very noticeable that there was room for improvement in Oklahoma roads. For instance, from here to Guthrie, which we'd think is just a 20, 25-minute jaunt now, it used to take a couple of hours over rock ledges and sand and ungraded dirt roads. And for a motorcycle rider, it required a good deal of skill.
I should imagine.
There were some barriers that existed, and these were barriers not only to motorcyclists but to automobiles as well. In driving from Oklahoma City to Shawnee, this range of Blackjack Hills out here made the roads almost impassable, sand and rock. It took a very good driver to start to Shawnee and finish the trip in the way he intended. It took a very good driver to go to El Reno for the reason of sand. And to go south for any distance was quite a chore, even for the powerful automobile and plenty of know-how. There were, in those early days of the automobile, 1910, 11, 12, 13, 14, along there, just two bridges across the South Canadian River, two automobile bridges, or carriage bridges, wagon bridges. One was at Purcell and was a toll bridge. The other was at Bridgeport, Oklahoma, and was also a toll bridge. There were several ferries available to motorists in the area of Union City and Mustang. And these ferries actually became waterborne at times. When the water went down, of course, they merely bridged the trickle that was left in the South Canadian River. Well, I think one of the most appreciated advances in Oklahoma has been the spread of a system of roads, highways, superhighways. And I think that this state has outdistanced a great many other states. I'm reminded every once in a while that Texas has more good roads than we have, but Texas is a far larger state than we have, than we are. But I think both within the city and out through the state, we have much to be thankful for in our road system. And that's one thing that I take a great deal of pride in. Not that I had a part in it, I've just been an observer. But the highways have changed the way of life for so many people. Now, whether they contributed to the upbuilding of the cities or the cities contributed to the highways, I don't know. But both have grown, and both, I think, in Oklahoma are magnificent.
One complements the other, it would appear, and without the hard surface arteries into the main core of business activity, perhaps the progress would not have been as outstanding as it has been.
Our schools, I'm amazed in driving around Oklahoma City to find a brand new school. At very frequent intervals, new to me, and new in age too. I think that our school board has been very far-sighted and extremely capable in foreseeing the need for schools in different areas and in providing those schools. I don't think there's quite as much politics involved as there is in our state school system. But I do believe that Oklahoma City, I'm not acquainted in Tulsa in this respect, but I think that Oklahoma City probably has outdistanced the state in its forward look for the need for schools and the location for schools and providing the means for them. I don't intend to criticize our state system. I think it's in OU and in Oklahoma State we have two tremendous schools. By any standard we'd like to judge them by. I'm sure they haven't reached the top yet.
No, I doubt it very much.
And another one that is growing very rapidly, I'm reminded, is Edmond.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I think their college up there is gaining faster than any other in the state.
As a matter of fact, it's attaining a national reputation in that respect.
Yes.
Many of our schools has. Oklahoma Christian College, as a matter of fact, the school for which we are doing this for their lending library, living legend library, rather, has just by leaps and bounds. And the enrollments at our Oklahoma State University and University of Oklahoma are just pyramiding each
Right.
year. It's the increase in population and also the increase in the mental agility and desires of the young people.
My father had, I think, a rather interesting part in bringing into being one school in Oklahoma City. He provided the original 40 acres on which Cassidy School was built.
Hmm.
And Cassidy has become quite a school in its own right.
Yes, it has.
Our grandchildren both all attend Cassidy, or have attended. The 18-year-old is now at Massachusetts in Dallas. But it's been interesting to watch that school grow, and I have in years past given a little of my time to it. I served as a trustee out there for 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that my part of the trusteeship was aggressive or contributed anything to the school, but it was quite satisfying to me to watch the school grow.
Oh.
You're going to have some tape to cut out here.
Well, that we can do very easily. Do a
Sure.
little editing.
I have a lot of recollections about Oklahoma. I don't know what you would like.
Anything that comes to mind. Anything that comes to mind, because some of the items that appear to some people think are unimportant, there's a certain amount of history to
It
them.
often happens that contrasts are interesting to people. They are to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have done some traveling for this company with a catalog, calling on retail merchants in all parts of the state. But when I began, it was possible to make calls in all the cities in the state, cities, towns, and villages, on passenger trains. Occasionally, we would ride a freight train, which was permissible in those days, but that was the means of transportation. Occasionally, there was a short drive with horse and buggy. For instance, like from Binger down to Lokiba.
Uh-huh.
And at some times, the arrival and departure times of these passenger trains were a little inconvenient. You might go to bed twice in one night in 2 different towns. But it could be done and was done. That was the accepted way of travel. The automobile was not so highly developed in 1910, 11, 12, 13, nor were the highways developed for the automobiles that
take care of them.
weren't developed either.
Uh-huh.
No. So as a means of contacting dealers over the state, neither the highways nor the automobiles were kind.
Uh-huh.
But there were passenger trains. And it's interesting to note now that the Frisco has a petition to eliminate the Meteor. This is a train that I read many, many times.
Uh-huh.
Our sources of supply in this business are principally north and east. And there has always been need to do some traveling, either for merchandise or for trade conventions of one kind or another. So the Meteor, for years and years and years, was that means of getting first step from here to Chicago, for instance, or from here to St. Louis, to Columbus, or wherever. St. Louis was a gateway, more or less, for travel north and east from Oklahoma City. I really resented the time when Frisco took off their steam locomotives.
Yeah.
These were a landmark in my mind. There's no transportation thrill that exceeds the tremendous puffing and huffing and puffing of these old-time steam locomotives.
Right.
And the Frisco particularly, because they had to use, on account of the many curves in their track, they had to, and mountains in southern Missouri, they had to use some very heavy equipment, not ideal for passenger train use, but the type of equipment they had to use to make the time necessary over mountain grades. And this was noisy equipment. They were mighty in their puffing, and they made tremendous time, considering the 220 curves between here and Tulsa.
For heaven's sake.
I was told one time, one evening, I was on the back platform, I like to see country. From a car window, from a back platform, from an airplane. I was told by one of the trainmen that they had needed to retrain their engineers because they had a schedule set up that the old-time engineers couldn't meet. They had to train these fellows to go into a curve with the throttle open, with the train pulled tight. Otherwise, there was too much danger that the cars would jump tracks. They, in order to meet the schedule requirements, they had to be retrained over, and some made it and some didn't. Oh, this to me was interesting because I've told you I've been interested in transportation.
Well, I think those old steam locomotives were magnificent things. And the sound of them, the puffing and the whistles.
Oh, yes.
And hearing them from a distance.
Now this is taken away in the diesels.
That's right.
Of course, the diesels roar and they make probably as much noise, but they don't do it in the harmonious way.
Well, there was a certain beat about a good, powerful engine pulling away.
Right.
It was marvelous. Well, I haven't seen one in a long, long time.
I haven't seen one in use for a long, long time. They pull them around the country to exhibit them in various places, and this is, of course, interesting. We have one out in our fairgrounds out here now. Incidentally, the fairgrounds is now on property that was owned by my father-in-law up to about 1930. And there's been quite a change, I assure you.
Oh, isn't it?
Yes. I think our fairground's magnificent. And it's growing.
That's
and
right.
Can continue to grow. There's room there for it to grow.
That sentiment is echoed by many, many people that come in here that are particularly strangers, and they see a fairground such as the one we possess. They actually don't believe that it could be so nicely done, even as simple as the basic architecture is. It's very functional and attractive.
Right. And I think it will be lasting.
It seems so.
I have a very amazed impression of Oklahoma as it exists today. I do a great deal of flying. A lot of it for pleasure, most of it I might say, but some for business reasons too. And I remember quite well when, on one of our very early camping trips, we discovered what was left of an abandoned oil well close to Spencer, I think immediately south of Spencer on Silver Creek. It wasn't long after that a well was drilled somewhere south of the fairgrounds, and had the equipment enabled them to go deep enough, it would have been an oil well. I remember quite well when the Mary Sudik came in, and I was driving from Enid to Oklahoma City. I'd been up there on a selling trip of some kind, and I could see this tremendous glare in the sky that grew as I got closer to Oklahoma City, and that was the first night of the fire at the Mary Sudik. Now, it seems to me that almost wherever they put down a well, there is oil. This whole area down this way that I'm over so often, extending from the airport, Will Rogers here, on south clear to the Red River, is just almost one well after another. And that's the picture of Oklahoma that I think has changed so tremendously in the last 30 years. More recently, the Panhandle area, Beaver, and in that general area, has been drilled up. Well, again, it seems that wherever they drill a well deep enough, they'll get gas or oil or a combination of both. And this certainly is tremendous industry for Oklahoma. I think probably it far outstrips agriculture. I can't be sure of that. I don't know.
I'm not sure of the percentages anymore. Although agriculture still is a fantastic business in this state. And the wheat growing is some of those beautiful fields of wheat north of here that you see.
And a strange development has taken place there. As wheat acreage is cut down, the use of fertilizers has increased until we have greater and greater wheat production.
The yield is much greater per acre than ever before.
The herds we saw 12 or 15 years ago across Oklahoma were generally Herefords. And now they are not. They're generally Black Angus.
A lot of Black Angus in this state.
Right. It's tremendous. And this extends all the way from Fort Smith to out to the Texas line. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of favoritism shown. Wherever bloodlines mean anything, it seems to be Black Angus today.
And that apparently has turned out to be quite a breed. And it's a magnificent looking animal.
In 1904, 5, and 6, Robinson Street was a street of churches. From 4th Street to 12th. It was commented on many times by many people that Robinson was a church street. It is, of course, a church street today, not in the same depth that it was then, because some of the older ones have been torn down. But it's most interesting to me to note the new church structures all over Oklahoma. And these are, they're no longer small makeshift at all. Even in the areas where, let's say, lower income areas, the churches have a substantial appearance. They're large. They're I would say, adequate for their congregations.
It seems that despite the fact that it was a wild and woolly western type of town that, like Topsy, it just growed, as they say, Oklahoma City, you're drawing the thought out on the churches, that despite all of the activity, which would be certainly a paradox to a church, that the churches just, they came in multitudes, you might say.
If there has been a conflict between the church and other elements in Oklahoma City, I think the church, including all churches,
Yes.
have come out very much in the lead.
It would seem so.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem so.
I'm not saying that I think people are that much better. I don't feel that I am. Perhaps the average isn't, or perhaps he is. But there have been a sufficient number of loyal, interested people to keep the churches in the majority position.
Well, despite this, I know some of the other people that I've talked with, they say that, sure, it was a rough town, so to speak, but that element was in a minority. And usually when there's a great deal of publicity about something that went on either then or even today, the less attractive things usually cause the more attention. Or
they make bigger headlines
That's
than the
and a church full of people.
than a church full of people. Yes. There's been some roughness in this area. During Jack Walden's administration, there was an election held here, and the word went out from the ARG that existed at that time that volunteers were wanted to guard every polling place. And I served that day in some Southtown area down here with a man I knew very well. And it may sound strange, it sounds strange to me now, we both wore six-shooters. We had no trouble whatever. But when those cams, when closing time came, those cams were taken up by a covered truck with from 1 to 2 cars guarding that truck. The election was that hot. I don't remember the principles myself. I was just carried away with the excitement of it. But we took those cams to the old county courthouse, which is then where the Holiday Inn now, the Holiday, downtown Holiday stands, and we saw them clear into the courthouse. It was quite exciting.
I can imagine.
Particularly as a young fellow.
Politics has always been exciting around Oklahoma, though, hasn't it? Then?
Yes, it has. I've never taken part in politics except to vote. Fortunately, my wife has demanded that I vote in every election, and I'm quite proud of the voting record that she has achieved for the Miller family. We now live in the city of Nichols Hills, and it's almost a heartbreaker that we can't take part in Oklahoma City elections, as for instance the last one. We have our favorites, of course, like
Certainly.
anyone else, and we pull for them in various ways that are open to us, but we can't vote for them. You know, I would like to say just a word. Almost as long as I've lived in Oklahoma City, I've known the name of E.K. Gaylord.
Yes.
I became quite well acquainted with him when he was a member of the Rotary Club here, and I was too. Perhaps had I not been a member of the Rotary Club, I wouldn't have had the opportunity of associating with him and knowing him by his first name. But in retrospect, it seems to me that that man has been a tremendous stabilizing influence in Oklahoma City. Now, it isn't everybody will agree to that, I'm well aware, but I feel that this is true. I'm not overawed by his money, of which he has a tremendous amount, or has earned. That is success that came to a man of excellent judgment and good guidance to his business. But his serenity is the part he has always taken in public affairs, and his willingness to speak out when the issues got hot. I'll always remember with a lot of thankfulness that there has been a man like that here. We have produced, this city, this state has produced lots of hotheads with big voices, sometimes doing the expedient things, and always doing it with lots of fanfare. It hasn't been Mr. Gaylord's method, in my opinion. And I think of Mr. Gaylord as being the big man in the history of Oklahoma City.
I suspect that you are absolutely right, and I believe that history will prove it that point. Very well taken. As you probably suspect, and as I suspect, and a lot of people know, there are many things that man has done no one knows about. He just doesn't wish it known.
I particularly admire his stand against liquor advertising in his newspapers. Not that I agree with him. That advertising is being done, and liquor is being sold. And I am not an abstainer, not from that sense at all. But when he decides that something is not for him or his newspaper, he backs it up at whatever cost is involved. This I admire in him.
He sure does. He sure does.
Yes.
Well, he's been here a long time also.
I hope he can be here a long time more.
Well, from the way he looks, and I saw him just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, last Friday, he looks like a perennial.
Oh, yes.
Age doesn't mean a thing.
He walks up and down Broadway from his office to Chamber of Commerce or wherever he's going, and back up again.
Had a good clip, too.
Yes, he does.
Had a good clip. He'll outwalk some of the younger men around town.
I have no doubt of it.
Yeah. Am I keeping you?
No, no.
We're just about on through this side. I'll turn it over. I'll just turn it over and thread it through again. Now we're recording on tracks 2 and 4. So it's, with the amount of tape that will be used, it's considerable saving to the school, and at the same time it maintains an excellent quality.
The school has made a large place for itself in Oklahoma. I believe it came here from Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there must be a place, and there must be a deep appreciation in a community and this is shown by the acquisitions the school has made since it came here. Land, buildings. Having had a little to do with Cassidy's school in its younger years, I know that this isn't easy to come by. This has meant beating the drum for money day in, day out, year in, year out, and doing it in the right places, in the right way, with the right people.
Well, they appear to be well on a solid ground, although it's like any college or any school. It's still an effort every day.
It's the same way at Cassidy, even after,
Surely.
12 years, 14 years of existence.
Mm-hmm.
They have no means for capital gains, capital investment, except to have a drive for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Their expenses are covered barely by the tuitions.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how the people have responded for so many educational institutions to actually support them the way that they do, over and above what they would normally support anyway through taxes and so forth.
Well, it's especially amazing since all of us complain about our tax bills.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes without saying that our tax is a big slice of our income.
Mm-hmm.
But our educational institutions, especially those like Christian College, like Cassidy, which are not state-supported schools,
Right.
they bear evidence of the seriousness of the people of Oklahoma in having excellent educational institutions. And our churches bear testimony to the same thing from a religious light.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think it indicates a rather solid background of the state, the people in the state. It couldn't be a state without the people, actually.
I think that's not a complimentary way of speaking. I think it's a factual way of speaking.
That's right.
Yes. But these are things that our churches and our privately supported schools are institutions that could be got along without conceivably, but we do have them.
Mm-hmm. So it just obviates the fact that there must have been a need somewhere along that line for that. I know the college is so oriented to the future. They, along with the other schools in the state. And as usual, as always, we have our public school problems of trying to get enough money to keep everything going.
Yes, and there's still the other angle that, an additional angle that we are subscribing to the welfare of our public schools, and yet we are willing, many of us, to support the private schools too. This extends through the parochial schools on into others.
How did the election in the city affect you the other day? How did you like it?
I was tremendously pleased. Now I have a new ambition for George Shirk. I want to see George Shirk
Go right ahead, sir.
get into politics really seriously, with both feet and with plenty of backing. I don't know what his politics are. I don't know whether he's Republican or Democrat or liberal or what he is, but I would like to see him go to Washington as one of our 2 senators. I think the man has exhibited a degree of skill, diplomacy, education, the qualities I believe would be good for Oklahoma and the United States of America, particularly if used in Washington. I say that without any criticism.
No, not at all.
Toward any Washingtonian, but I would look for a little improvement up there if George went.
It's amazing. Since we're just sitting here rambling and talking, there's a groundswell for him.
Is that so? I'm glad to know it. Certainly it swelled up within me after the election.
A lot of people, a great many people, have felt something, but I don't think they were aware of exactly what it was. Self-evident, I believe, was this election, even though we had a very small turnout. or the city did rather, in the election. But still, the small turnout of voters, the registered voters that did vote in the last election for mayor and city council, the majority in favor of our present mayor, George Shirk. It's fairly good evidence of how people are thinking.
Tremendous majority, several times to one.
Yeah. I've heard some people say that this state would, as great a state as it is, and it'll be even a greater state, its stock would go up that much higher across the country if George Shirk sat in the governor's seat someday.
That might be a stepping stone to Washington.
Which would, as you say, be a logical transition. Since Oklahoma City and we all are at the same time the state capital. So actually the city and the state are working fairly close together, hand in glove. One doesn't do something without the other one knowing it.
Were you acquainted with George Shirk's father?
No, sir. No.
His name was John Shirk.
Mm-hmm.
He was tall, beautifully built individual. Might have been a tremendous basketball player or a football player in his earlier days. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He was an older man than I am, an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Piercing black eyes. A very unsmiling individual. One might think he was very severe. I think probably he was about the things that mattered to him.
Mm-hmm.
He was the head, in the time I'm thinking about, of a division of the Chamber of Commerce called the Open Shop Division.
Mm-hmm.
And as the leader of that division, he was probably the most disliked man by labor unions in the city of Oklahoma City. George Shirk, John Shirk, was big, unafraid. He spoke right out, and he was a crusader for this open shop division. And for a long period of time, 10 or 12 years and possibly more, this was his hobby, this was his life. I really feel that the law business he did was incidental or a part of his work in the open shop division. He was certainly an individual who served his community in an excellent fashion in the manner he chose. Well, it is interesting that his son is coming along now, and whether it's in politics or outside of politics, it's a matter of service to the community. And it's interesting to note that the boy is following in that respect and in such a capable manner. I say, boy, how old is he? 46, 7, 8?
Around in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And it's something that I don't think he ever was seeking.
I think the job looked for him.
That's the consensus
I believe it did.
of many people.
I happen to know O.A. Cargill in very early days, early in his career. I think when I first knew him, he was either a patrolman or a streetcar conductor. I don't remember which came first, possibly the streetcar experience. But he had the farthest out streetcar line. If I'm not mistaken, it ran from 23rd Street to McNabb Park and back. He wasn't bothered with too many customers, although there were important ones, of course. They needed transportation. He was always studious, quiet, soft-spoken, serious, studious. He always had a book in the streetcar with him. These were law books. He was an interesting individual. It was interesting to me to watch him through his career up to the present moment, because I've known him for so many years. I would say that he has hit a tremendous peak of success, the success he went after. I haven't always agreed with Mr. Cargill, not by any means. There was never any reason for disagreement. But I think his will be quite a historical name in Oklahoma, regardless of how this case against him comes out. I think that he is not as much criticized now as Moulman Pruitt was, or as Prince Freeling was. These were two of the earlier day attorneys. Their critics would say that they would stop at nothing to gain the verdict. May be true. Both of them were men of tremendous power. Prince Freeling was a very charming individual. Moulman Pruitt, I wouldn't call charming. He was the type that went after what he wanted in no uncertain terms. But they have a part in the memories of Oklahoma.
That's right. Each one does, somewhere along the line.
This is true.
That's right. And none of it is that insignificant, because it's taken all these people to make this city.
Yes, they have all contributed to the cross-section, whatever that may be. Are there any areas you would like to suggest to me? I don't mean to infer that I know all about all of the areas, but what haven't we talked about that? I don't know that anybody will ever listen to this, but I'd rather pay them if they do.
No, we've covered quite a few of the facets of the spectrum. This area down and through here now, where we are sitting now, the Miller Jackson Company. As you said, your father came; he was close by, and then he was in here in the business. In those days, back in 1904 or 5, if you can recall, it probably was very sparsely populated, wasn't it, through here?
True.
And
the building we occupied on Grand Avenue, it's still standing after some 60 years, was the only brick structure in the block. Next to it was a very small and very local type combination meat market and grocery store. It was owned and run by an old gentleman, German gentleman named Henry Boschert. On the other side of us was an old-timer, two wonderful Jewish people, a man and his wife, Henry and Camille Sonnenschein.
It's an odd name.
An odd name. Recently I've seen it in print. Their son, their only son, was involved in an automobile accident, as I remember it. But those were the only buildings. They faced on the Grand Avenue, two of them frame and one of them brick. This was unimproved property, and I mean that very literally. Here on the corner where the Hunziker buildings stand was a depression that was full of water. The water was drainage water. But in those days the water table was not very far below this building either. In In 1909, this 50-foot building was built by Mr. Jackson for the Young Corporation, Miller Jackson Company. In 1911, 25 feet additional adjoining on the west was built by Mr. Jackson. And those buildings were retained in his estate until other provision was made in his will. In 1924, this building next here was built by the corporation. The good Smizers built the building for us, and they did a nice job. Sometime later, the next 25 feet was acquired and built on by the corporation. Now the corporation owns the 4 buildings that I've talked about. There is a question as to whether it's better to stay in this part of town or go out to the newer areas such as Santa Fe Industrial District or others. But owning this property has put some limitations on us and our thinking. We're of the belief now that this property has become much more valuable since the crosstown expressway has come into being. Of course, it hasn't come into use yet, but now it's possible to get to this vicinity, which is close to shopping areas as well as to many wholesale or distributing activities. We think that all of this area down here is due for a reevaluation, not in dollars, but in usability, versatility. We can leave here and go to Guthrie in less than 30 minutes. We can't get out of Oklahoma City in quite 30 minutes to go to El Reno, but this will change. It's possible to come from Norman to this place of business in 20 minutes. It takes me 14 is the best I've ever done from Nichols Hills, and I would say that 18, 19 is just about average.
Yes.
I can get on the expressway and come clear around from Nichols Hills and do 70 miles an hour, or I can come down Classen, Maine, and stay within the speed limits and make the same time. So it depends upon whether I want to drive fast or drive slow, which way I come, there's no difference in time. But getting back to this area, apparently Oklahoma Hardware thinks the same way we do, because they have recently disposed of property in the capital area and assumed more property in the block west of us.
Well, the face of the city has changed, hasn't it, so rapidly? And it is changing even more rapidly now.
Yes. It has been noticeable over a period of years to me that cities such as Denver, San Antonio, Kansas City they've all had their concentrations of downtown pyramids of brick and stone, but they've also had outlying concentrations, and now this city is achieving the same thing. I compare it mentally more with San Antonio, because you can, from any high point in San Antonio, you can see the big buildings in the city, but you can also look out and see the medical centers such as we have in the Veterans Hospital area. In other directions you can see groups of tall buildings such as we now have northwest from Oklahoma City. And you're right, the face of the city has changed a great deal, and in the most healthy way. Mrs. Brown perhaps wouldn't agree with me, or Mr. Kerr, but I think this is healthy. because an overcrowded loop district, let's say, would not accommodate as much traffic as that district plus the outlying areas can accommodate. And incidentally, Mrs. Brown has protected herself pretty well with her Capitol Hill store, Penn Square store,
right.
and others that are on the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. But they still maintain in the close in the city itself,
True.
Down in the heart, the core of the city, and
she's in touch with all of the shopping elements, whatever their desires are. And Sears have the same sort of viewpoint. They show that by their investments in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I might say the Ward do the same thing.
Well, they would appear to be pretty smart merchandisers. They're rather successful.
I'm more and more amazed by the Sears organization as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit about distributing business, just a little, compared to what they know about both distributing and retailing. They, to me, are the master merchandisers of America. I don't own any Sears stock. I wish I did.
It'd be rather valuable right now.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you seen their new store on Southwest?
I have been all around it, but I have not been in it.
Yeah, it's a magnificent store.
Yes. Well, I think Sears has set a pace for many others, including Ward.
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's anything that's good for Ward, it is Sears, because they have forced Ward to do a lot of things. But isn't Sears also forcing J.C. Penney?
Either that way, or it's the
Something is.
yes. I think they've had. It's obvious they've had a change of philosophy.
Yes.
Mr. Penney is he's a real dean of all merchandisers, so to speak.
True.
But he is more or less. He was here not too long ago. Although he is active and keeps active all the time, he'll wear out about three executives that try to keep track of him. The actual administration and operation of the business has been shouldered by some other executives, and they are moving forward in rapid strides now.
Oh, yes.
Fantastic. Their store here at Shepherd Mall is a very good example, and they'll have one similar to it and somewhat larger, I believe, in Dallas very shortly. But they are also of the same opinion that when more concrete evidence of downtown improvement is going to take place, and that they'll come right, not that they'll leave where they are, but they'll also be in town as well.
You wouldn't like for me to interrogate you, but don't you think we owe a great deal to our Chamber of Commerce? I'll answer.
There doesn't seem to be any question.
My opinion.
Let's just let me bounce that question right back to you.
I think that yes, a great deal of what Oklahoma City has achieved, beginning way back in 1910, I believe the first meat packer came to Oklahoma City, the first national meat packer. I think I'm so fortunate in being able to remember some of these things that shaped the future of Oklahoma City, and that certainly was a step. It was realized how important a step it was, because at that time there was a provision that that area would not be included within the confines of Oklahoma City for tax reasons. This was one of the tax reasons for that institution coming here. But I think in his field we have been extremely fortunate in having Stanley Draper. I've heard it said by some people that Stanley gets more credit than is due him. There'll always be people like that. I don't think so. there has to be a meeting point for all of these points of view that make up a Chamber of Commerce. And Stanley is that meeting point. He's the man that takes what he gets and puts it into play. I think we've been most fortunate in that respect.
There doesn't seem to be any question about it. And I've been apprised of that in my 6 years that I've been in Oklahoma City. Not only is the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce and Stanley Draper become a national figure, but now an international figure. And it's and travels around the country. There isn't any question about the queries that you get from people about, well, what gives with that Chamber of Commerce there? What makes them move? What makes them go that? What are they going to do next? And your only answer is, it's constant. It's a constant progression.
Yes, and a complete awareness of what opportunities exist, and the seeking of a way to get some benefit for Oklahoma. I'm delighted with one thing. I think the Chamber of Commerce has now assumed a great interest in the development of the state of Oklahoma, whether it be an industry for Oklahoma City or Oklahoma County or not. And I think this is as it should be, not in a parental sort of a way. That isn't becoming to cities like Lawton or Bartlesville or Tulsa or Enid or Ardmore, but I feel that those cities have profited somewhat by this strong Chamber of Commerce that Oklahoma City has. I think they'll continue. I think that attitude shouldn't be changed. I think it should be developed.
I think they have gained a tremendous momentum.
True.
Tremendous momentum over the years. And solidly based as well. Despite any political differences that people have, and something or some group or individual who is extremely active can also turn out to be a very ready target, so to speak.
Oklahoma City has achieved prominence in various types of transportation, lately in the air, with flights starting from here to Paris. This is good, but we do have sufficient recognition airwise now to be considered an important hub.
That's right.
And I think this is excellent. The other type transportation we'll spend more money on. It'll be many times slower, but I can't help feeling that we'll have water transportation sometime. It may be the most expensive thing we ever brought into Oklahoma City, but it will have the result of making this a more favorable freight rate area. It's the type competition, and the only type that can do that, I think.
That's right.
The present competition between trucks and rail doesn't do anything or very little to give this area a rate advantage, a freight rate advantage. Very little. They are only fighting themselves, and both of them are fighting for more tariff all the time. Air transportation, we seem to have established the facilities, the groundwork that it takes to make this an important air transport center. If we can now bring a few barge loads of freight of some kind in here or out of here to take us off I used to call it the freight rate hump. That's still a good name for it, because that's just where Oklahoma City is and has been. All of our accomplishments of the last many years have been in spite of the fact that this is a high spot from the Pacific Coast, from the Gulf Coast, from St. Louis or Kansas City gateways.
That's right.
And the one thing that could take us off that hump is perhaps, I think almost certainly, a waterway that is usable to within a few miles of
Sure.
Oklahoma City. And you know that Muskogee, Oklahoma one time had this very thing. And when Muskogee got a water rate on account of a steamboat having forced its way and made a landing at a prepared dock there in Muskogee, this was before you came to Oklahoma. This was back in the 1908 or 9. Muskogee then had the opportunity of being the chief distributing city, let's say this side of Dallas, because of rates that they commanded. Somehow they missed the boat. They didn't have our Chamber of Commerce.
That's about it. Well, it's going to take a few years, but we're going to have it. We're going to have water transportation.
I think we'll have water transportation. It's rather paradoxical, isn't it, that the slowest form of transportation is probably the one that exerts the greatest influence on other forms of transportation.
It's
This, of course, is looking at it rate-wise.
yeah, that's what I said. What you said, rather, on the rate structure. It's extreme influence, and it's amazing to perhaps those who are not aware that barge tonnage on the Ohio rivers, for instance, and Mississippi rivers, increasing each year.
Oh, yes.
Now that's a
I
pretty
have,
sight too, isn't it? That's a pretty sight to see a tow coming up the river. That's
How they manage those towboats with their 1,000 or 1,500 feet of barges ahead of them, I'll never understand. But this, I think, must call for the greatest skill on water.
and
But
particularly
these
in
rivers are not straight.
I was going to say, in those crooked rivers,
Oh, yeah.
full of sandbars and
Right.
Who knows, irregular bottom.
They never cease to be of interest to me. One of my hobbies for a good many years has been flying. And I have flown over the Mississippi from Minneapolis down to juncture of the Ohio several times.
Carroll.
Sometimes a little farther south than that. Weather sometimes causes detours to a light airplane to pilot to my ability. Well, I never cease to marvel at these long towboats, barge lines, or barges that
Excuse me.
are kicking up or kicking down the river.
How long you been flying? Some time now.
1935.
Yeah, that's nice. The Bonanza up there, huh?
Now, the Bonanza wasn't built until 1946.
Yes.
I owned one that was built in 1947. But I began to fly in travel airs and two or three other types of canvas and wood airplanes. I found out right soon after 1935 that I could no longer afford it. It was high priced when there was no object in it, just to satisfy one's. So there was quite a gap. I learned to fly in 35. There was quite a gap between that time and when I got into modern airplanes like Bonanzas.
You still fly?
Still own one.
Yeah. Good. It's a
And
great
fly.
sense of accomplishment and great joy, isn't it?
Well, it's a to me a different world.
Yeah.
Somehow or other I forget. I can't worry about anything. I don't have any troubles in an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
I'm completely at ease. I'd much rather fly than drive. It's a little hard on my family. They don't always like to fly where I want to fly. Or when I want to fly.
You still flying Bonanza?
Yes.
That's a great airplane. Real fine airplane.
I like it. It's they're expensive, but this is within the range that I perhaps can afford. Do you do some flying?
Yes, I did. I haven't done any lately, but you never lose the yen to really get back to it. I still want to get back and refresh and get the ticket back again. So.
Military flying?
No, single engine.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot of unofficial time in multi-engine.
Yes.
But which won't count. But flying DC-3s with crew members, so I've flown a lot of them.
One of my instructors, I remember, was a young fellow named Jack. Not complimentary that I can't think his name right now. He's still flying, flies for Halliburton. But he had a tremendous lot of hours in DC-3s during World War II out on the West Coast. He was crew chief or some of the time co-pilot. But it was illegal time, as he called it.
Yeah.
Jack Morris.
A lot of mine's illegal too, but it's good.
That is time you couldn't count in your log.
No. Marvelous training.
Yes.
It's a great old airplane.
Well, I feel very at home in a single-engine plane. Many riders and flyers to the contrary. I'm not certain that more single-engine planes crack up than twin-engine planes.
No.
And I feel that I can put a Bonanza down in places where you couldn't begin to get a DC-3 down.
Oh, yeah.
Impossible to get a Convair down. And a Constellation, or these big jets, they are just not made for emergency landing. But a little ship like Bonanza, I've flown many places where I felt that where the only thing in sight was a railroad track, for instance. And I think I'm mentally prepared in case of engine failure, complete engine failure. But I'll just leave the gear up, put her right down on the rails, and let her coast until she's all done.
Yeah.
There are places in Northern California and in Oregon that be nothing else to land on up in that volcanic area. But I think whatever plane man flies, he probably evaluates its emergency characteristics.
I should think so.
I feel better in the small ones than I do in the big ones.
Well, you still like to have your hand on it. You like to have a certain amount of
Yes,
control.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a lot to do with it, I think. Now, you've piled up a few hours then, haven't you?
I believe that my next even number will be 2,700. Quite a few, but that's not many compared to some. We have a man with our company who has over 5,000, because that was in the Air Force. But he still won't land a Bonanza.
He won't land?
He won't land it. And I think I understand his viewpoint.
Yeah, he's used to the heavy
He said
stuff.
there's no object. If anything did occur, there's no reason why I should be landing this airplane. And And I feel the same way about driving someone's new car. No object in it at all. And I'd rather not. An old car, my own cars, I love to drive, but if I got into your car and it were a new Lincoln Continental or whatever, I would probably say no thank you if you offered to let me drive it.
Can you think of anything else that perhaps we may have missed?
I think I probably rambled too far.
No, I think that's good rambling, because there's some things that perhaps if we'd prepared for it, you would not have included, and we'd have missed. But I totally appreciate it.
Well, I'm very hopeful that this business, of course the basis for this interview was business, that this business will go on. We have some very capable men in the business. I am more and more certain almost every day that a couple of them could do a better job than I'm doing. And I think there will be distributing problems to be met, surmounted, profited by for years and years to come. Not only this business, but other types of distribution. So it's my hope that this business will go past the 100-year mark. We're already 3/5 of the way there.
Yeah, that man up there on the wall really started something, didn't he?
Some of the early days were very interesting. Business began in those days at 7 o'clock. The business day ended at 6 o'clock. And it was dark in the winter at 7, it was dark in the winter at 6. But we were here. On Saturdays, we closed at 5.
Oh, big day. Big deal. Closed at 5.
Right. My first job with the company was at $3 a week.
All of that?
And I think within 2 years I'd come up to $4.50. And this was very fair money for unskilled labor, but it was typical of wages that were paid up and down the street.
Well, costs weren't so high those days either.
That's true.
So it's, as they say, your dollar bought more.
I wasn't conscious of being downtrodden at those prices.
And,
Well, I hope that this hasn't all been inane or just an opportunity to let me talk for quite a while about nothing in particular. I do a lot of reminiscing. I'm told it's a sign of old age. And this is probably true. Without having the age, I couldn't remember the things that I do remember. So I don't quarrel with it at all. But I am glad that I have lived in this, the latter part of one century and the beginning years of another during those times, because there have been so many events. I well remember the beginning of the Spanish-American War and the troop trains that came through Chillicothe, Missouri. In fact, I almost got away with a bayonet from one of the boys. I remember very well that even after coming to Oklahoma, there was a very vivid remembrance on the part of a lot of people of the Civil War, of the heat, the passion, the hates, and so forth and so on. I remember the threat of Indian War one time in Oklahoma. I remember some very vividly some outlaw chases that during one of them Sheriff Garrison of Oklahoma County was killed. There were exciting times. There were other times of nothing but peace and prosperity.
Work hard.
Cotton at 5 cents was no stranger to Oklahoma at the time of Mr. Wilson's election, Woodrow Wilson. I think that was about 1912. We still raise a good deal of cotton. It commands a better price, but that's because, and it is raised in Oklahoma because of the mechanical pickers, because it can be handled in a mechanical way. I think this is a tremendous advance. But we talked briefly about livestock and how we see Angus from one border to the other.
That's right.
How the state has been drilled for oil in sections that oil was undreamed of 50 years ago. We're now a very large manufacturing state, and there's where we have ample opportunity to grow. Tinker, of course, FAA, Mecklenburg Duncan, all included in this. Sometimes I feel that we in the distributing business have not kept step with the great advance that Oklahoma has made.
Perhaps it's the peculiarity of the business itself. You are stepping along with it, but it doesn't seem that way because of the nature of the business.
We do business with a lot of friends. That I'm eternally thankful for. Having been here as many years as I have, and having traveled the state as much as I have met a lot of people, merchants, and my acquaintance over the state has been very large in that respect. And that's one of the satisfactions that the business brings, doing business with friends.
I should imagine.
No, I think you better turn that machine off. You'd let me ramble here. It'll cost you probably $10 in tape.
I think we got a good one, though.